Emily is recording this conversation, so anything that you don't want out on the interwebs for anybody else to see, don't speak. So I appreciate everybody coming and spending a few minutes expanding your knowledge. I want this to be more of a workshop than a presentation, in the sense that if you have information that you're willing to share and discuss, then you'll get more value. And if not, that's fine. If you're not comfortable with it and you want to reach out to me individually, I'm happy to walk you through that conversation just by yourself. So today's conversation is about growth. That's me. Just in case you were wondering if I was impersonating anybody. And we're going to cross over a little bit into marketing, and really a lot of this is experience share around my journey, the mistakes I've made, and what I've learned along the way. But when it comes to consistent growth, my story is we started as a franchise back in 1997, and our growth was real solid up to about $2 million in revenue. And then it stalled. And the challenges that businesses have are different based upon where they are in that growth curve. In other words, getting from 100,000 to 200,000 is not the same as going from 200,000 to a million, or a million to 2 million. I've had explained to me by one of my forum mates that your business is precisely engineered to deliver the results that you have. And that was kind of insulting to me when I first heard it, but it is reality. If you want something different in your business, you're going to have to change something, because what you're doing is giving you the results that you've got, whether that's marketing efforts or personnel or operational efficiencies or profitability, all of those things. You have to start with this mindset of, I'm going to do something differently than I'm doing now if I want different results. Sounds simple, right? So this concept of growth curve, I'm stealing from a scaling up advisor down in Texas. And the way he segregates businesses is not based upon length of business. It's not based upon revenue. It's not based upon profitability. In this growth curve, it's based upon number of employees. And the reason why he did that was because, and I can share the article with you, but Emily, if you'll make a note, I'll share that follow up. But basically, number of employees is a better proxy of the complexity of your business across all industries. So this may not be exactly your business, but it's a good place to start. So basically, when you start up, you got 1 to 5 employees. It's all about the growth model, and the revenue model is all about keeping the doors open. It's proving what you're doing works. It's making sure that you've got enough money to pay the rent and pay the payroll. So that is a distinct segment. And some of you may feel like you fall in that. Maybe you've been there and done that. The next stage is grow up. And that's where you start having conversations around adding the right revenue. So it's growing the right way. You've been there and done that. You've taken the low margin customer, the low margin client that had a great top line number, but you didn't really make any money on it, but you had to have it because you had to keep the doors open. But you don't want to do that again. You want to grow profitably. And then when you've got that mastered, you move into the scale up. And to me, the difference between grow up and scale up, the difference in growth really is around creating the marketing machine to give you a machine that you know that if you put in $1, you're going to get $1 or $2 out. So you've got this marketing machine that delivers predictable results, and that's a different thing than the previous two. So before I move on, everybody understand what I'm talking about as growth being different depending upon where you are in the stage of your business. Okay, so we're going to focus on the grow up because I think that's probably where most people are. But the principles are, the financial principles are usable and applicable across all three. But I'm going to focus on the middle and the grow up. For illustrative purposes, we are in the scale up. So we're trying to figure out how to build the marketing machine where you get a predictable $2 out for every dollar that you put into it. All right. So the components, I don't know why this is lagging. Last time, there we go. The components of this core growth metric are basic financial elements. I don't want to go over anything that everybody already knows. If there's a term on here listed that you're not really comfortable with, raise your hand. Like, I can tell you exactly what gross margin is. I know what it is in my business. I know lifetime value of customer, et cetera. You know all of those. Everybody does? Okay, perfect. That makes our discussion be able to go deeper. So getting to the core growth metric, what I want to know in my experience was, okay, I want to know how to take the business from startup to grow up. How do I get from $500,000 to $1 million? And the component there is, how much is it going to cost me to bring on a customer? I've got questions around how to operationally do it, right? So I've got questions around people. I've got questions around marketing. So what's the messaging? Who is my target customer and where are they and how do I reach them? So I've got marketing questions and I've got operational questions. But the first thing you need to start with is the financial question. And the financial question is simply, how much does it take? How much does it cost to bring on a new customer or client? And that is something where I see a lot of small business owners get stuck, is they don't have a good idea of those 5 components. They don't know what it costs to bring on a client. They don't know what a customer is worth. And so they go into the marketing questions and the operational questions. For example, I don't really know how much it costs to bring on a client or a customer. And then I go to my marketing person. I go to my marketing vendor, my pay-per-click or my digital agency or whoever. And I say, all right, I need a strategy to bring in new customers. But the problem is I don't know what the financial side of it is. And so the marketing person's not going to ask that question. They're not going to ask those questions. They're just going to come up with a strategy to attract customers and implement it. Well, one of 2 things are going to happen. They're either right and you're going to grow and you're going to either have enough money or not have enough money, or they're not going to be right in their strategy. And you don't know if it's because of the finances or it's because of the marketing. You just know that you didn't get the results you wanted. But the real problem may be you're not spending enough, or you're spending it in the wrong place. And because it fails, then you move on to the next thing. from a marketing standpoint, the biggest failure we had was, well, let me back up. In the first 10 years of the business, the marketing world was very different than it is now. It shifted to digital. And so I didn't know moving into the digital realm what the marketing looked like. I was creating it from scratch from what I bought from the franchise. So in figuring out the new landscape, I knew what I paid before to get a client on board, and I knew what they were worth, but I had no context to know what that looked like in the new digital age. And what happened was we'd spend money on a strategy and it wouldn't produce results. And then we'd say, well, that's not working. We're going to go try something else. And that didn't work. And so you just kind of move around. You never stick to anything and you don't get predictable results. Well, the problem was, in our case, was one, we didn't have the right strategy, but two, we weren't spending the right money. I mean, we were spending a fraction of the money on pay-per-click ads, for instance, that we really needed. I needed to spend more and I didn't know how to spend it. Does that make sense with everybody? Okay. So in this case, just computing that number, starting with that core growth metric, we're gonna assume that you've got a gross margin of 50%. We're going to assume that you don't have to add any other costs to grow in the short term, next 12 months. So you don't have to hire any people, you don't have to get any extra space, you don't have to buy any machinery. We're also assuming that the average annual customer spend is $10,000. The lifetime value of that customer is $25,000, and the cost of acquisition is $7,000. Your current revenue is $500,000. So with those facts, how do you come up with the number? Well, if I want to grow 20%, that's $100,000. And based upon my $10,000 a year customer, that's top line revenue. That means I got to add 10 new customers. It also means that my cost of acquisition is $70,000. But here's where most business owners really screw up, is they only look at that top line. And the top line is great in the short term. It's shitty in the long term. Because if let's take an example of hiring a new person. And we go through this concept of a break-even analysis. So I got to hire a new person because I'm going to grow, and it's $50,000. It costs me $50,000, employee and taxes, benefits, whatever. And I say, well, I only have to bring in $50,000 to cover the cost of that person. True, but what does that mean? All that means is you've provided somebody a job and you're working more for the same amount of money, which, who wants to do that? That doesn't make any sense. So the reality is you need to look at the gross margin, because that's what you get after paying that person. And that's more reflective of your long-term profitability and investment. So back here to this example, the cost of acquisition is $70,000. My gross margin contribution in the first year is 50. So if I look at that, that may or may not make sense. Okay. It's going to cost me $20,000 coming out of pocket to grow 20%. Okay. That's a decision that only you can make, but at least you have the data to make that decision. But when we go into the cash flow versus profitability, which is where most people don't get into, this is on an annual basis, and it's very simple. But really what that means is you're going to bring in all of those people at the beginning of the year, right? How likely is that? It's not. So if you work through some scenarios and say, okay, well, let's assume that they come on throughout the year evenly. That may or may not be right. You may have a seasonal business. But let's just assume for this case that we're talking about they come in equally over 12 months. And so that gross margin comes in over the year in less than upfront. So now what we've got is we've got our cost of acquisition up front and the gross margin coming in over the course of the year. So instead of the net capital need of 20,000, it really is 57,000. And I didn't go into the calculation because I had a spreadsheet and you know, but and again, that's a simple linear analysis, and it may not be reflective of how your business or your marketing funnel works. You may have a multi-year sales cycle, and you know, you may not even be able to predict when they'll come on. But in our in our experience, it's always best to know the worst case scenario, because you don't want to run out of money. That's the worst scenario. So going back to this, does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So our core growth metric is simply, what does it cost to bring in a client? I'm going to pull up a different document. I'm sorry, I was not prepared because I didn't think I'd want to discuss this, but I'm going to. Can you guys still see my screen? Yes, sorry, okay. So the core growth metric is really two components. One is the cost per customer. So how much does it cost to bring in a customer? And it's simply the cost of acquisition minus the gross margin, not the top line dollar, okay? But the second component is years payback. And the reason why years payback is in here is because it allows you to strategically look at, does this make sense, right? So compared to alternatives. So the cost of acquisition divided by the gross margin percentage is the year payback. So in our situation here with this, anybody want to take a stab at how long what's our annual years payback on this situation? We'll put Kevin on the spot. He's a CPA. Can't hear you.
Can you unmute your phone? There you go.
All right, I'm here. You're wanting to know the payback?
Right, the years payback.
All right, so we got cost 50. Let's see.
It's roughly 1.2 years. So we've got our cost of acquisition, and then we've got our gross margin contribution. So it's going to take us about 1.25 years to get our money back. And the reason why that's important is because when you go into a growth mode, you need to understand not just the cash flow, but then the profitability long-term. Does it make sense? Because if you're, now let's take this to implementation. Let's say we go to our marketing agency with this number and we say, okay, I've got 70 grand to acquire 10 customers. What does that look like? And they say, well, there's no way you're going to get there with those metrics. It's going to cost you 100,000. Then you have the ability to compare strategies and say, well, is there, so this agency is proposing this strategy. That number doesn't make sense for me now because it's a 2-year payback, right? So it's an absolute point to reference to say, is this a good use of my capital? I'm going to share, this is some information from a marketing consultant that we have used and are currently using. And I'm going to share a couple of articles from him. But basically, the concept of building a marketing machine so that you can get predictable results, this is my experience with going from grow up to scale up. But I think it's very applicable in the other two. it just becomes more important when you get into scale up because you can't get from point B to point C without it. But they're concepts that you can absolutely use in grow up stage. And I want to highlight this one, this customer insight process. So what basically he did was he interviewed clients, prospects, other business owners. Then he developed a survey. We sent it out, validation, comes back with a very deep dive of knowing what it is that we're solving. What is the outcome that our customer wants? And I think that sounds real basic, but it's critical. And when you're in a business like ours, which is often misunderstood by customers, they don't really understand what it is that we do or how we do it. It leads to a lot of confusion. But really having a clear idea of what the outcome is that they want, that allows us to build our service around it and our marketing messages and everything else. The Peach had me watch Undercover Billionaire. I don't know if anybody has seen that, but in that first couple of episodes where, you know, the premise is he gets stripped of all of his money and his name and gets dropped off in the middle of some town he didn't know, and he's got 30 days or some time period to build $1 million business. Well, the first few days, basically what he was trying to do was figure out survival. He was in startup mode, right? He's got to cover his costs, right? But then once he got that covered and he didn't have to sleep in his truck, he moved on to all right, how do I grow profitably? All right. Then he's in that grow up phase. And one of the things he said just blew my mind with the simplicity. And I think I've shared this story in Accelerator before, but the statement was find the buyer first. So the example he had was he'd found some company that was making dog chew toys or something, and he got them to let him to go sell it, and he'd make $1 or $2 off every one he sold. And so he goes to the dog park and he's pitching this dog thing and nobody buys it. And so he goes back and he's like, I'm trying to take a solution and go find a problem for it, rather than what he started with was he went and looked for people that were wanting to buy tires, and then he went and found tires, right? And that's what all this customer insight process is about, is it's understanding what it is that the outcome that you're really trying to deliver. So John, I'm going to put you on the spot because I think your business is very interesting in that regard.
Sure.
Talk about what you thought you were doing when you first started versus the problem that you're solving now.
Sure. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, my company is called Who-Fi. We work with public libraries providing people counts, basically using Wi-Fi. It's not what we started off. I'm an engineer. So we started off back in the day literally with this network security tool, kind of detecting, we thought were unknown intruders and stuff like that on the Wi-Fi network. And that was the technology that we built. It was kind of the basic problem we were trying to solve. But it took us a really ridiculous 3 years to figure out that most of the people that were using it for network security, once they figured out that there was no one on their network, they would cancel. So that was awesome. Two was that, the people that, there were a lot of free clones and things like that. So there's just a lot of problems, like from a cash flow, from a demand kind of standpoint, it was just an overall terrible business. And then we dug into the numbers based on a recommendation from somebody, and we found that there was a certain group of customers that didn't churn. And when it turned out they didn't churn, it was banks and public libraries. And it turned out that public libraries had this reporting need, and that was kind of the real problem that they were trying to solve. To your point, where everyone else, it was kind of an interest, it was a hobby. Is I wonder if someone is on my Wi-Fi, and then if they did find it, there was no real deep need or reason for it. When it was the who's on my Wi-Fi tech, same, all the guts are the same. It's just changed to where the market was and what the actual need was.
And so, what did that do to your growth once you identified what they really were buying?
Crazy. I mean, that was, we made like 25 grand a year doing the who's on my Wi-Fi stuff, because we could never, we had thousands of customers. We could never keep them more than about 2 or 3 months. We started going after libraries, and within 2 years, we went from 25 grand to about 100 grand, and then 100 grand to 300 grand, and then now 300 grand or about 600K, all within about 5 years. So we went from like 25K to 600K in about 5 years, roughly. Pretty rapid.
It's like you just turned on the faucet.
Yeah, it didn't. I mean, it was just shift in demand. They were willing to pay a higher price, and they didn't leave. So we've
it was recurring. Right.
Yeah, now our churns. Yeah.
Let's if you're willing, and if you're not, that's fine. Let's talk about these numbers for you.
Sure.
And see if so. What is your planned growth for the next 12 months?
Yeah, sure. So a couple different things. We do have a long sales cycle. It tends to be almost about 12 months from first time people hear from us, do a demo, and actually sign up, because library procurement processes are much slower. So we're doing a combination of, I'm actually preparing for a talk today. But we've got kind of a combination of outbound emails and then sales demos, and then we're also doing some different like sponsorship type things, being in different groups, giving talks, and as well.
What percentage growth are you projecting?
So the percentage growth that we're trying to hit is 50% for 2021, and we're basically already starting towards that goal. That was really our goal this year, and COVID just kind of made things a little wonky.
Right. Everybody paused. All right. So 50% is strong.
Yeah.
That's strong. What is your margin?
So our margin's 80%.
Okay. That's another thing that I'll point out, is that your margin drives your growth speed. If you have a higher margin, you can grow faster. That's just 101. Yeah. So what does that lifetime value of a customer look like to you?
Sure. So we think about it, our base unit metric is a location. So because some libraries are a single location, some are 50 different branches, right? So we can't really do it per customer. We have to do it per location. Okay. The lifetime, or so the per year average value per location is about $600. And then the lifetime value of that. So far, we have customers at about 4 or 5 years. We don't really know the total cost, but it's 3 or 4, probably about 3,000, 4,000 so far per location.
Lifetime value.
Right, but then that's per location.
Right, and that's also top line dollar, right?
Exactly. And the average location size per customer is probably average about 40. Is what we because we tend to go kind of the larger cities and states and things like that. So
now you've got a situation where your customer might be a $4,000 lifetime value on one end versus a multi-branch that would be worth $50,000.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So we have both. So
let's take this a step further.
Yeah.
Do you target, from a marketing standpoint, those prospects the same?
We break them into basically 3 categories. So libraries that are below a certain size that may or may not be able to afford our product, so it's very minimal. Then there's a certain size that what we call wheelhouse, and they are primarily outbound. And then there are effectively like states and consortiums, which are your big groups. So those are, if a single state buys, it's usually on average about 50, 60, 70K. And so we have the different kind of marketing sales strategies for the three effectively.
Is your cost of acquisition, I assume, different for those three channels?
Yeah, exactly. But the sales cycle is much longer. But the cost of acquisition, and this is, I'm interested in what you're talking about, because we've had a hard time trying to gather that, because it's basically, if you look at, our marketing costs, which is mainly outbound email, it's mainly people, right? So it's our people as kind of a marketing expense, and then our sales, which is states and large consortium, et cetera. That's also a people sales expense more than, although we do have, like I said, some ads, we've got some sponsorships, et cetera, that are targeted at each, right? So we can lump all those together, but I haven't really broken it down, and so I'm kind of fascinated to hear some of this. So what you're saying with the growth based on that. So
basically what you're saying is you've got some labor marketing costs that are blended with your administrative or operational labor costs.
yeah,
You've got people doing multiple things, right?
yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I think you bring up a very good point, because one of the things that I see consistently, and I've done myself, frankly, is not accounting for all the costs. There's these ghost costs, hidden costs that you maybe aren't aware of it until you get into it. So in your situation, do you apply any of your labor to cost of acquisition? Or is it just the advertising expense?
Yeah, when we put it in our budget, we basically have a line for marketing and advertising, but then we really kind of put payroll as payroll, right? And so I can, but when we think about it as far as total cost of acquisition, yeah, you're right. It's my co-founder is basically sales. That's his job. So his entire salary is really sales, right? And then our marketing part-time person, her entire salary is marketing expense, right? So,
okay.
And that's why when you put it that way, I don't know that we've calculated that and haven't looked at the cash to grow or what would be necessary as well. But that's a really good area for us to take a look at.
Right. Fantastic.
Can I ask a question?
Sorry, go ahead, Carl. Yes.
Yeah. So, kind of to expand on that question, that was one of the things that, I'm not an accountant, trying to figure out how to keep track of the customer acquisition costs. Those things that are sort of the, maybe a yearly salary or kind of a sunk cost, or hard to really divvy it up per customer. How do you go about putting in kind of a yearly person salary into I understand how, like directly with pay-per-click and stuff like that, you can really break it down to, I spent $1 and got back, $3.50 per customer. But just some of the nuance of how to do that with the less direct expenses and how to chop it up per customer acquisition.
So, Carl, remind me again what your business is.
Yeah, it's Olympia Prep. We're an ed tech company. We do college and career preparedness for high school students.
Okay, so you've got some digital marketing costs, and then you've got some salesperson costs.
Yep.
And the question is, how do you allocate that personnel cost to your acquisition cost?
Yeah.
Okay,
that's right.
So obviously, if someone's doing sales and that's their full-time job, or marketing and that's their full-time job, then you include that cost along with all of the related taxes and benefits. If it's a part-time gig, like they're also doing teaching in the college prep, I don't know, but they're doing both. I think it's as simple as starting with an allocation of time. How much of their time by percentage, and just do it. If they do half their time, use half their salary. But I will point out that, and especially John, with your owner, the danger in that is, are you allocating the right dollar amount? Not the percentage, but is the wage the right number? Because with owners, we know oftentimes what they pay themselves is not indicative of the marketplace. If you were going to go replace them with someone to do that, would you be paying the same amount? And the added thing is, when you're talking about an owner, your person from the outside is probably not going to be as effective. So even if you're paying them the right salary, you might have to hire two people to do what he's doing. So making sure you're using the right dollar amount. But even if they're not an owner, if they're a person doing two jobs, is what you would have to pay that person to do it full time if you went out and hired them. Because when you're doing blended jobs and you're paying them a salary, you can split it by time, but that may not really be indicative of the full cost. Because if it was a full-time person, in other words, they may be getting paid less than they should be because they're doing a hybrid job and they like it. But if I had to go put somebody in that job full-time, I'd have to pay them more. Or they'd be less effective because they're not as versed in it operationally. Carl, does that answer your question?
Are you suggesting to take that number and divide it by the number of customers that you have?
Right. So the cost of acquisition is the total cost to bring that customer on over time. Now, you could do it on an individual basis, but that's a lot of data tracking, right? So the opposite end of the spectrum is, I'm going to take the total amount of marketing costs and I'm going to divide it by the number of new customers this year. That's two ends of the extreme. Okay. One's really general, one's ultra specific. I don't think either one is practical. I think having something where you've got a good breakdown of the costs, outside marketing costs and internal labor costs, and then looking at it by channel. Because like John's situation, where he's got three distinct buckets of customers that generate three distinct customer values, he needs to know their marketing process may be very different, but you still need to know what that marketing cost is per channel. Because then you're saying, well, I'll give you a great example in our business. So we brought in a channel partner and started advertising on a podcast this year. Well, when we went into it, we had historical data telling me what our cost of acquisition usually is and what the revenue of the client was, the thing that drives margin and lifetime value. Well, we weren't real sure of the audience. I mean, we had some guesses, but when the customers started coming on, they were about half the size of our normal customer. They were much smaller. And so we had to reevaluate it. Now I know that channel is costing me $1,600 in acquisition cost for a client that generates $1,500 in gross margin. That's not great for us. I mean, it's not awful, but it's not great. So knowing it by channel is important because the customers usually are different by channel. Your channels and strategies usually attract different customers. I mean, ideally. But that kind of goes into my last thing I'll say and preach on this is measuring it. So it's not something that you do once. It's something you build into your financial process and you measure constantly. For us, we do it on a weekly basis, but at least monthly basis, depending upon how fast you want to grow, because you want to make sure that your estimates, what you're historically done and what you've projected, are meeting what the actual results are before it's a problem. So, Emma, do you want to share your information and your business? Don't have to if you want to. You'll have to unmute.
Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, I'm like completely fascinated by all this right now. I think in my mind, I'm trying to figure out how this relates, like how I can use this information in our business because I find it helpful. I have a restaurant, and we're growing into a second location, and so I'm actually like in the midst of kind of restructuring how our management and marketing and finances are going to go versus like, because we have like a labor budget for in store, and then we really don't have a labor budget for like corporate office. And I'm trying to kind of navigate how that transition is going to look and how much money we can allocate to certain positions. And right now I'm the blended role. So I do all of our operations and all of our marketing.
You're literally chief cook and bottle washer. That's one of my favorite phrases, but that's you.
Yeah. And like I create all of our menu. And so I take on all of this right now when that's obviously compensated by my salary. But what you said is exactly right, because if I were to hire some of these things out, I'd have to hire 2 to 3 people with a salary higher than I pay myself. And so I'm trying to figure out what in the long run, because we're going through like marketing, like a transition, because COVID is changing the way that we're able to market, and it's changing the way that people are finding us and coming to us. And so I'm trying to figure out if hiring someone to do that role will help us in the long run or if it will hurt us in the long run, because I am able to do it, but that doesn't mean I should be doing it.
True. So let's go back to the question. Do you have a way of tracking new customers, or is it just total customer count?
So a little bit of both. So we just now are able to track new customers, and it's really coming from different marketing strategies that I put out there and different campaigns that we did. Like I'll give you an example. So like our point of sale system, we're able to track, how often our customers are coming. And I was just looking at all this yesterday, looking at our top customers from the past year and on average how much they spend and kind of how often they're visiting us and things of that nature. But now we just did like our first direct mail campaign. And so now when those people come in, and they have this card that they got put in the mail, our team has to input that code. So we're able to track where they're coming from. In the past, I didn't know where our customers were coming from, but I can track their information once they're our customer. The only marketing we had done our first year was just social media. And so now we're trying to, I think that social media is just kind of oversaturated for us right now. So we're navigating into some newer ideas, opportunities. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it does. I can tell you in our business, attribution has been a struggle to get our arms around. I know big companies with large marketing budgets can get into multi-point attribution, and we've marketed to them on Facebook, and we've marketed, and they've seen a display ad on AdWords, and I know all of those places. We've touched them and figured out that cost, which is great. But if I just want to know, where do I spend more money, right? So where do I put the dollar in that I get $2 out?
Right.
I have to go back and look and see, where did they come from? And I can tell you that was a struggle for about a year, and for us to get that right. To where I feel like now I have the information of, oh, well, this one cost me 1,200. This cost me 1,600. Okay, let's push that lever harder.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like well, at least I'm hopeful that through some of these new campaigns and things that we're doing, because we have several different things going on right now, and we're able to track where they're coming from once they come into the store, with that certain code that we generated. So I'm hoping that, in the next 2 to 3 months, when some of these things kind of come to an end, we'll be able to see like, okay, I put, $2,000 into that and we got this much out of it, and we'll be able to start tracking more of those things. But to be honest, our first year, I had no idea where they were coming from. I think social media was helping because but I really have no idea where they were coming the first year.
Yeah, I got real pissed off at my one of my outside vendors on digital marketing when we were talking about attribution, and he said, well, you're just going to have to accept the fact that you're not going to be able to figure out where some of these leads came from. And, you just see this general correlation between you're running more ads and spending more money. And even though I can't tell you they exactly came in from an AdWord, there's some correlation. And I'm like, I don't buy that. So we figured out how to get there. Trapper, do you have any insight and experience in you've worn many hats, many businesses. Any experience share on growth and money?
Yeah, I mean, we are, I would say we're probably past maybe the growth phase. We're kind of in scaling mode now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, for like a cost of acquisition for our customers, we're in construction. We have, we sell some people $100 worth of stuff, and we sell some people several $1 million worth of stuff. So it's a little difficult to nail that down and know that if you put $1 in, you're going to go. I mean, I've got those metrics on just overall business, but not per customer. Mm-hmm. And probably the thing that resonates with me most is, and we've been through this through the growth phase, is doing business with the people that are profitable. There was a time when we looked at that top line number and said, yeah, we're a $5 million business, we're a $10 million business, whatever the number was, but it didn't really, fund anything other than to, it made our manufacturers happy. My business, we basically buy equipment from custom manufacturers and then we resell it, for those of you who don't know. And so we really started looking at gross margin as our measuring stick. And so we fired, that's so cliche. We fired customers, but we decided that there were certain customers we would only do business with on our terms. And if they didn't take our bids or our orders or whatever, we didn't care because we didn't really make much money on them anyways. And that certainly helped our profitability. And so that's probably the biggest thing for me that, you've talked about is at some point you got to start making money, and which, top line sales doesn't really support growth if you don't start building cash and getting gross margin to actually invest more than just kicking the can down the road.
Mm-hmm. I think my experience in this, one of my favorite concepts is the Pareto principle, where, it's 20% of your customers are going to give you 80% of your profits, and your percentages may not be exactly that, but it's scientifically proven that that's just the way nature works. And the 20% of your customers that you make 80% of your gross margin on are the ones that you want to focus on and grow. It's not the 80% that's just filler. And when I talk about this customer insight process, that's really what it was about, was what are the 20% and how do we go after them, to the exclusion of the 80%. But here's the deal. Now that 20% becomes 100%, right? And it's how do you get to that 100% of that market? How do you saturate it? And that's our challenge now, and that's what we're working on, is refining our messaging and refining our service offering so that it attracts that Drew Goodmanson is the marketing guy that I'm using, but his statement is, if you go into a room of strangers and you're pitching your product, your chances are that you're not going to find that many buyers. But if you go into a room where you know everybody has what you need, that's the room you want to go into. So as you go from grow up to startup to grow up, it's about moving out of that talking to everybody and talking to just the people that you want to talk to. All right, well, I'm going to end early unless there are other questions, comments.
I was going to ask something quickly about something you said earlier about your marketing spend, and this is it's going to be a tough one to answer because it's kind of a general question. But my perception right now is that there's this giant gulf between spending very little on your marketing, doing social media, doing things that already have gotten you traction, or sort of getting referrals from customers. And then there's this complete other end of the spectrum where almost every marketing proposal we've gotten is just so ridiculously expensive. And I kind of believe them when they say that, we got some where it's like minimum $7,000 a month, like spend so that you can really be competitive on your ads. I guess the question is, since you were speaking a little bit about your experience and getting in there and sort of reworking your marketing, did you have, since you're kind of over that hump, how did you bridge that gap, at least that gap that I perceive being there, to kind of, is there a way to stair step up your ad spend, or is it really like all or nothing? Like, if you're going to spend, you got to spend big to be competitive. How do you get from there to there?
Well, and I'd love everybody else's experience share around this. My experience share is that digital marketing agencies are really, really bad with numbers, which sounds strange, but because marketing is really all about analytics and numbers. But a lot of them in the space are creatives. They're not numbers people. But the answer to that question for us is So I gave you my example of a client that costs us $1,600 to bring in and is generating $1,500 in gross margin. Well, I can go out into the market and buy clients. I can buy accounting practices for 1 to 1.2 times revenue. So that's my backstop. Because I say, well, if I have to spend that, then my strategy might be more effective to be doing acquisitions as opposed to marketing. So that's my backstop. But I think the answer to the marketing, we spent 75 grand with a digital agency over the course of 18 months and got one client. And I wasn't really involved in the business at that point, but I can tell you I came absolutely fucking unglued when I found out that, because I'm like, one, why? And two, why so long? I mean, you could see that this wasn't working out 90 days into it. So why did you keep doing it? I think digital is, for most people, including myself, and I've been working in it pretty heavy for the last couple of years, is still very much a black box to most business owners. It's kind of, I don't know how it works. Some magic, comes out of it. Because there's so many different components to it. There's so many different ways you can, to carve that up. I think the answer is I wouldn't accept that that number is what you have to spend. I think that you just may have to do a different strategy. Or if 7,000 encompasses several different strategies, let's focus on the one strategy instead of all of them, see if it works, prove it, and then we'll spend more money on that. But at the end of the day, it's got to make economic sense to you, right? I mean, to spend, if spending $7,000 generates that much in gross margin for you, it makes sense. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's just a strategy of, okay, well, I got to go get more capital. But I wouldn't assume that that's the way it has to be, because it's kind of like, you know, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's been my experience with digital agencies, is that they have a way that they want to do things. And yeah, they can show you why it has to cost that much. But my experience is that's not always the only way. John Trapper, you got some experience here?
I have a little bit of an experience share. I have a couple of businesses. My primary business I just spoke about. I have another one that is basically local SEO for small service companies. So the short version is I develop websites to rank for small service businesses, and then I rent them out to small service businesses. They essentially rent the leads as these leads come in month after month. And so I'm kind of in the SEO space as a minor player. Like I'm basically creating these little digital properties, and I don't have any interest in doing monthly SEO or anything like that. But to do that, I've had to educate myself on how all that works. And Chris said it best. It's still, you know, SEO is a black box. And it's intentionally a black box because, you know, even the SEO experts don't know what Google, they have an idea of what Google is how they're going to rank you and what metrics, which there's hundreds of, that they're going to use to rank your site and your content, but they don't really know. And so I would say most SEO businesses are going to say, hey, hopefully they can give you some experience of a business like yours where we had this type of spend and whatever, and give you some basically experiences they've had and a track record, but they truly don't know whether you spend, you know, $2,000 or $7,000, it's going to take you 30 days or 30 months. Only their experience is really going to kind of guide how quickly they think they can do it for your scenario. So, and I don't have an answer for you on whether $7,000 is a good number or a bad number, but what I would do if it were me looking for an SEO business, I would definitely get some client references and experiences, because SEO businesses too, like I could do it. I mean, I could easily get a graphic designer and I could look like the most professional SEO business, and I could charge you $3,000 a month plus ad spend, and I would show you results. I absolutely would show you results, but you wouldn't know whether I'd done that for 100 people or you're the first person. And at the end of 3 months after you spent $7,000, I might say, man, you're just in a really competitive market. Like, we're just going to have to keep going and keep going.
Or Google changed their algorithm, you know.
Yeah, and they do. They change it 8 times a day, and it's an easy. I mean, for SEO guys, it's great because it's like, wow, damn algorithm got me again. But after 6 months, you've paid them 30 or 40 grand or 10 or 5. And you go away and there's literally millions of other people that they market to do SEO services. So you got to find the right company that takes some ownership in what they do and has the track record that you can verify. Otherwise you can get bit. So that's my experience share.
John, did you have anything you want to add to that? We're at time, but if you've got something, please share.
Nah, I mean, Google changes often. I'm literally a techie, and I have no idea how to make it work sometimes. So good luck. Find a good company. So sounds agreed.
Could I just ask Trapper to kind of repeat? I like the advice of going and looking for someone with experience. Specifically, what do you look for to kind of verify that it might be a good agency to go with? Like speaking with past clients. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean that's what I would do, and understand what their niche is. You know, some SEO companies are going to specialize in retail or strictly online retail, or you know, like we've got a member in EO that's in my forum that does automotive, right? And he could do SEO for other things, but he's really good at automotive, and so that's what he does. So just making sure, Carl, I don't know what your business is, but you know, do they have other businesses that are like yours, and can you get a reference from those to understand what their results were over the course of whatever your time frame is. So really just references, and you know, making sure that they do operate in your space too is certainly helpful.
All right, everybody. Thank you for your time. Thank you for
Thanks,
your experience share.
Thanks,
And
Chris.
have an awesome day.
See y'all. Have a
Thank
good
you, Christian.
one. Yeah.
Okay.
See you guys.